So here's Charlotte Danielson, an amazing, smart, thoughtful woman, very pro-teacher woman who in 1996 wrote her framework for teaching, which was basically deconstructed teaching into 76 subcomponents. She really did a lot of work on this and deserves huge credit for this very thoughtful job of taking teaching apart and then at each one of these 76 things describing 4 levels of performance, from outstanding to proficient to needs improvement to not so good. And at first her rubric, she calls it a framework, it is a rubric, was used more as a coaching tool, which actually was her desire, was that it be a coaching tool. Piloted in charter schools and so forth. Then the MET study, the Measures of Effective Teaching study, the big Gates-funded study came in a few years ago, 2013, and they really embraced the idea of rubrics to evaluate teachers. They looked at 4 rubrics, Danielson's being one of them, and they embraced this, and all of a sudden the country just went crazy about rubrics. So all across the country and abroad too, rubrics are being used now as teacher evaluation tools. And I think they have certain advantages over narratives, but the more I looked at rubrics, and this is the tail end of my principalship, and then the last few years, I've developed 2 major concerns about rubrics. The first is they're too long. 76 components, even smushed to 22, which is Danielson's current configuration. It's a very dense document. It's 24 pages long. It's and then Marzano's and the others. These are long documents. And in terms of the busy world of schools, I think they're often too cumbersome. So the second concern is that a lot of people have gone into using rubrics to evaluate an individual lesson. And I think this is a major conceptual error. Rubrics really are a comprehensive description of the whole of teaching, the whole job of teaching. And to come into a classroom with a rubric in a clever iPad application or something and try to score an individual classroom on a rubric is, I think, a huge mistake. It changes the whole nature of the observation. It makes the administrator a much less perceptive observer, and it changes the conversation with the teacher into a coaching, talk about teaching conversation into a judging 4, 3, 2, 1 scale kind of thing. And also gives way too much feedback at once, which is a big mistake, again, that no athletic coach would make. So with those 2 in mind, I designed a different rubric. And again, my rubric is free and open source. It's out there, it's being used, adopted in a number of states. And some people tweak it. The Roman Catholic schools here in the Massachusetts area have added a different domain for their religious mission. But I want to use my rubric as an example of how I think a rubric should be used. I'm not trying to sell this rubric because it's free, but I want to use it as an example because I've got it in my computer. So the first decision that any rubric writer has to make is, what are the domains of teaching? How are you carving up teaching? Now, every rubric does this slightly differently. So here's my approach, and here's one example. Let's talk about planning and preparation first, unit and lesson planning. Let's talk about classroom management, because without that, you're nowhere. Then let's talk about actual teaching, the delivery of instruction. Then, and the researchers would say this is tremendously important, perhaps the biggest one of all, is monitoring, assessment, and follow-up. Like, are you checking for understanding? Are you fixing learning problems in real time? Then, of course, family and community, which is a big, big component. And then finally, your work as a professional, how you work with your colleagues, do you get your paperwork in on time? What's your attendance? My rubric actually has a line for teacher attendance, which I think is tremendously important. No substitute is as good as a teacher of record. So here's one page of my rubric, and just to give you a sense of, I think what you would look for in any rubric, whatever rubric you use, is does each domain fit on one page? Because then you can get a picture of a person's performance. So I look back at myself in my 9th year of teaching, Martin Luther King School, Boston, and I evaluated myself on this very important page. So looking at this page, you can see that Kim has got a problem in area E, recognition. Well, according to this rubric, I do not have any work posted. For some reason, I didn't do that. And on this rubric, I get a 1. I get a does not meet standards on that. There are a couple of other areas, criteria and self-assessment, where I was mediocre. I consider level 2 performance as mediocre. I was solid in the other 7 areas, and look at that last column, the top column there, not one single highly effective rating. So this gives you a general picture of Kim's performance on this page, and also very specific feedback to Kim. Now, how's he doing overall? Effective, okay, so I'm effective on this page, not getting fired on this page. But you can see the advantage of a rubric when it's used well at the end of the year, again, this is summing up the whole year's performance, is it gives you both clinical and holistic feedback. Now, here are the 6 pages of my rubric, right? I put them on one screen here. And just, again, you get this sort of very detailed data. So planning and preparation for learning, the first domain. Kim is, and this is real. I mean, this is me looking back at myself as a 6th grade teacher in Boston after 9 years of experience. This page is a little better. The 3 highly effective ratings here, overall effective. Classroom management, my weak area. Even after 9 years, I still was scoring improvement necessary level 2 on this page, and you can see the weak areas. Real game plan there for improvement. If I'd been given feedback like this, deliberative instruction, mixed, overall effective. We just looked at monitoring assessment. Family and community, overall effective, 3 mediocre areas, 2 outstanding, and here was my strong point, professional responsibilities. This is partly reflecting my desire to get into administration at that point. I was pretty strong at the outside classroom stuff, very strong in certain areas, so I was highly effective. So Kim's overall performance in these 6 domains, you can see visually here, and again, this is what you want to look for in a rubric, is does it give you this visual, detailed picture? So here's the last page of the rubric that sums everything up. There are my 6 domain ratings. What's my overall rating for the year? We can eyeball it as effective. So, but underneath this general data, that the previous page is all the detailed data, which would be amazing feedback for a teacher. It is important to get the teacher's input, and I strongly advocate that. So here's how I think a rubric should be used. Okay. But before we do that, let's just talk about, if I were sitting with my administrator at the end of the year looking at all this data, the administrator should push me, okay, Kim, for the next year, what are the areas where you want to grow? What are your goals? No more than 3 goals. And looking at what we just saw, it's kind of a no-brainer, okay, classroom management, Kim. Read Fred Jones's book, get your routines in order, have a limit setting thing, use preferred activity time. You need more differentiation. There's not enough differentiation in your learning stations that you're using. And I think I would come up with this, I need to open my door and work more with my colleagues. So those are what should grow out of the rubric at the end is improvement goals for the following year. So again, here's how I think a rubric needs to be used. It's the end of the year summation of all these other things that are going into the principal's brain. So many observations, at least 10 conversations after each one, brief narratives. Dropping in on those team unit planning things, looking at the quality, especially the assessments. How are the assessments? How's the unit planning? How are the essential questions? Then those data meetings, how are those going? This is where we talk about student learning for the whole team. Parental observations, input, praise, maybe complaints, professional development, other activities in the school. He runs the chess club. And then this crucial element at the bottom there, teacher's self-assessment. The teacher actually filling the rubric out themselves and doing a comparison. So when to use the rubric? Not during a classroom observation. That I think is really going to distort the whole process and prevent the administrator from doing a good job of observing. Not afterward. New York City is doing this, sitting down afterwards and going over Danielson scores. I think that's not a good idea. My photograph here is a little humorous on that, but I think it does not produce a good coaching conversation. Rubric is to the end of the year. And so I think 3 points in the year is when to use the rubric. At the beginning, to do a self-assessment. Teacher sets no more than 3 goals. If you use the rubric the year before, of course, you can use that to set the stage at the beginning of the year. Then in the middle of the year, around mid-January, doing a check-in. And here's how I think it should look. On the left is the teacher's self-assessment on this page. On the right is the administrator's tentative, just as what I've seen so far in pencil. And they compare, and you'll notice that on this page of this particular teacher, there are 2 disagreements. Look at the second line there. The teacher gave herself an effective, the administrator gave her a highly effective. That's a quick conversation. You're absolutely right. Or the teacher may push back and say, I'm not there yet. And then look at the last line, okay? The teacher gave herself an improvement necessary. The administrator gave her a does not meet standards. So that's an important conversation. And at that point, the administrator should probably have some evidence, probably have something to go by. And again, the teacher may present evidence too and may talk the administrator out of that. But that's in January. It doesn't count yet, but it's a heads up on anything that may be serious. So let's go back here. So then I think doing that again in May or June, at the end of the year, at the end of the rating year. Again, teacher input, look at each page one at a time, discuss differences. Probably no point in discussing the areas where they agree, but the disagreements, talk about those, and then come to closure. And Now, of course, if in November there are problems, major problems in the classroom, the teacher needs a heads up at that point. Maybe fill it out at that point. Certainly have an improvement plan and clear notice about unsatisfied. There should be no surprises at the end of the year. So used well, I think rubrics are very powerful, and I'm convinced that they're far better than the old system. They provide a shared understanding, a common language about what's good and not so good in classrooms. They're objective. If there's more than one administrator in a district, they're all reading from the same hymnal there. Definitely is a push toward excellence. So level 3 is solid performance. That's the way the rubric is written. Any rubric is written, but yeah, people want to be A students, and it definitely pulls them in that direction, which is good. The next improvement step is if it's a well-written rubric, is described in detail. So if you're a level 2 on this is what it looks like to be level 3. Okay, it's easier for a teacher to accept criticisms out of 60 items than from a narrative, perhaps. It's a natural shift from the coaching that takes place during the year to now we're evaluating. Now we're actually putting in writing how you're doing on this 4-point scale, which I think is the right scale. It's quick. An administrator can fill out my rubric in about 20 minutes. It is not time consuming. You may have noticed how little space there was at the bottom for comments. That is deliberate. Basically, the rubric is doing people's writing for them. So it's quick. And the leadership team of a school can look at data. Check this out. So here's a school, a small school, and these are the 6 domains. I'm just using my rubric as an example here. So you can see there's a lot of green, a lot of solid teaching, quite a lot of blue, especially Marcia and Mark. Look at those two. Those are kind of the very strong teachers in this school. So a leadership team, this is of course confidential, the leadership team sitting down, perhaps the superintendent sitting down and with some lead folks and the assistant principal looking at this, some things would strike them. First of all, Marcia and Mark, strong teachers who can be leaders and mentors and coaches and PD presenters. Then look vertically at the monitoring, assessment, and follow-up, the 4th column there. So even with Marcia and Mark, this is the weakest area. And then look at the guy at the bottom there. Look at Richard. So he has got some serious weaknesses here and some mediocre performance, but notice that he is strong in classroom management. This is a teacher who might fly under the radar. Never sends kids to the office, no parent complaints, you walk by, things look fine. So if you don't get in there and really look at what's going on, you wouldn't notice that. So, but he's a red flag. So I mentioned that level D, column D there is the weak area. Look at the data in there. There are 10 subcomponents. And here we see the details, again, for professional development, for training, for mentoring and so forth. The 3rd column over on the spot, formative assessment, is weak across the board, even Marcia and Mark. And then the interim assessment piece, the whole PLC piece, is also weak across the board. So we have all kinds of guidance as a leadership team from the rubric data. So this to me is the reason why you really work hard to get the rubric to be accurate scores of teachers so that they can actually get the feedback themselves, and so the whole school can look at the data like that.